Welcome to the Old Man Sailing Book Club. Today we're going to start Faster, Louder, Riskier, Sexier, A Wonderful Life with ADHD. Dedication. This book is for Tamsin, who said, "The reason you can't write fiction is because you're not interested in other people. But you're good when you're writing about yourself." Epigraph. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. Søren Kierkegaard. Foreword. This book has had a long period of gestation in the microchips. I wrote it during the year after I took the ADHD test in 2017. Apparently, not only did I have the condition, but I was in the 1% of the most severe cases. At the age of 68, I had managed to excel at something. That first year after the diagnosis was a confusing time. It is no small thing to have your entire life explained to you when you are nearly in your dotage. Now I had an answer to why I did so poorly at school, why I was so bad at relationships, why I had so few friends, could never remember people's names, constantly mislaid my glasses, my car keys, my children. In the end, I dealt with the revelation the only way I knew how. I wrote it all down. A long and tortured explanation of how this peculiar mental kink accounted for a lifetime of never being entirely sure what was going to happen next. Reading through it, I realized that what I had here was not so much an explanation as a long list of excuses. If this was an autobiography, I didn't much care for the central character. Apart from anything else, one of the characteristics of the condition is an unpleasant compulsion to share inappropriate, intimate details. So, instead of showing the book to anyone, I wrote another, gutting the original for anything that might pass as entertaining and basing it around my passion for boats and sailing them long distances on my own. I had spent a lifetime writing for newspapers, something which is always done at breakneck speed. Writing 2 books back to back was no trouble. The version that emerged I called Old Man Sailing. It was a success. It topped the bestseller lists. Well, it topped the bestseller lists in the Amazon sailing category. That's one thing about writing for newspapers. You learn to make the dullest material sound interesting. Even a troublesome life dogged by poor decision-making and a good deal of inattention. I followed it up with 4 more sailing books. Yet, all the while, the Book of Confessions stayed hidden away in a file that was moved from one computer to the next, to a Google Docs folder, to a flash drive, still never seeing the light of day. It might have been in the restricted section of Hogwarts Library. Until now. Now, an undercover reporter for the BBC has exposed a number of online psychiatric clinics which hit on a clever wheeze for exploiting the interminable National Health Service waiting lists for ADHD consultations. Since people who think they have the condition are notoriously impatient, there is a fortune to be made by charging them over the odds for a quick Zoom consultation, telling them they do have it, and then selling them the drugs to fix it. Other interesting facts popped up in the report. It is estimated that 5% of the world's population have ADHD. That is 1.5 billion people. It's all over the internet. One of the most popular UK podcasts is called You're Wrong About ADHD. It's a hot topic. So maybe now is the time to put myself out there as a happy ADHDer. For yes, after 7 years, I have come to terms with the man in the book. Once I started to read it again, first at the age of 70, and then another 6 times over the next 4 years as I got older and began to make sense of the whole absurd story, I learned to see the positive side. Certainly, I still have ADHD, but I don't see it as an affliction anymore, something to be cured with pills or years on a therapist's couch. Instead, I embrace it. After all, if I didn't have ADHD, would I be here now, doing precisely what I always wanted to do? Would I have had half the life I've lived? Could it have been any faster, louder, riskier, sexier? If you've got this thing, take my advice and make the most of it. Other people might not find it much fun, but you will have the time of your life. Chapter 1. Discovery. Somebody walked in behind me. Everyone walked into my room behind me. That's what happens when your desk is under the window and your back to the door. When people walk in like that, you have 2 options. Swivel round in your fake leather executive-style chair to see who it is, or keep looking out of the window and try to work it out from the footsteps. It helps if they speak. Strange how often they don't. So that left us with who's in the house. What time is it? In this case, mid-morning on a Wednesday. I think it was a Wednesday. Who would be in the house on a Wednesday morning? Hugo was 14, so he would be at school. Lottie, at 16, was in her GCSE exam year, and so she might be home, supposedly revising. Theo had gone off to Liverpool University to study medicine. I'd been up there to see him on the way back from working on my new boat. Well, she was hardly a new boat, 44 years old to be exact. I had found her in Conway in North Wales, and there was a lot of work to do before getting her into the water. Liverpool is right next door to North Wales, so it made sense to drop in. Theo had shown me his room, very luxurious, like a budget hotel. Not at all the way I imagine student living. We went to a couple of those huge Liverpudlian pubs with music blaring and bouncers on the door at 6 o'clock. A meal in Bella Italia, not what it was. Tamsin and I used to love Bella Italia and its 2-for-1 offer. No, it couldn't be Theo. Owen was home from university now, having graduated in English with creative writing from the University of East Anglia. I'm still bursting with pride, and he does write well, even if I don't really appreciate the fantasy genre. But whoever had walked in, it couldn't be Owen, because, true to his creative nature, he writes all night, or video calls his girlfriend. Anyway, Owen never rises before midday, so it couldn't be Owen. In that case, it must be Tamsin. That figured. The children always say what they have to say as soon as they walk in, often before they walk in, sometimes from a different room altogether. So it had to be Tamsin. Tamsin and I had reached that stage in our marriage when we didn't say much to each other anymore. This was not because we were so in tune with each other that language was superfluous, rather that we were so out of tune it just caused trouble. She tended to keep to the other end of the house. Over the past few years, We had become like those couples you read about who live separate lives under the same roof, cooking separate meals, devising an unspoken system to avoid finding themselves in the same room at the same time. We did meet for family dinner, but for Tamsin to come down the passage to my end, this must be important. She appeared at my shoulder. She was carrying a page from a newspaper. She put it down beside my laptop. She said, "Do you think you might have this?" I kept quiet. Nothing annoyed Tamsin so much as people asking stupid questions, particularly me, because I had a habit of doing it so frequently. I looked at the page. It was the family section from the Saturday edition of The Guardian. Tamsin's parents took The Guardian on Saturdays, their one paper of the week. Eddie removed the family section and handed it to Ira, while he read the important parts. Ira considered the family section to be the important part. Then they swapped, because Eddie and Ira had one of those marriages in which they did talk to each other. They discussed everything. By Wednesday, they would be finished with the family section and pass it on to Tamsin. Tamsin always read the column by Tim Lott. This column was called Family Life. Tim Lott was a successful writer. He'd won awards for his novels. His Family Life column documented the slightly chaotic and often humorous goings-on in a typical North London literary household. Except from now on, it wouldn't. The Lotts were getting a divorce. Now, it's one thing to contrive interesting scenarios in the hope of avoiding the columnist's nothing to write about nightmare, but surely getting divorced would be classed as unseemly desperation. Apparently, it all had to do with a column he had written about his forgettery. I thought he had cleverly invented the word, but no, I find Google Docs spell checker accepts it. Although, interestingly, it doesn't accept spell checker, unless you put it in inverted commas, as it turns out. Anyway, forgettery, according to Collins' English Dictionary, means a tendency to forget. Humorous. And apparently Tim Lott had this very tendency. In spades. It was something that provided him with endless copy, and which Mrs. Lott found infuriating. He would go out to buy tomatoes and come back with potatoes, or forget why he had gone out at all. He was forever asking where he had put his car keys or his glasses. Whatever form his forgettery took, it was always a good source of column inches, although invariably Mrs. Lott failed to see the funny side. Then something unexpected happened. A reader wrote in alerting him to a much less humorous condition called attention deficit hyperactive disorder, or more appropriately the adult version, adult attention deficit disorder, AADD. Tim Lott took the letter seriously. As a writer preoccupied with his own small world, he found the possibility fascinating. He researched AADD online. He found the ADHD Foundation website. He checked the list of symptoms. Carelessness and lack of attention to detail. Continually starting new tasks before finishing old ones. Poor organization skills. Inability to focus or prioritize. Continually losing or misplacing things. Forgetfulness. Restlessness and edginess. Difficulty in keeping quiet, speaking out of turn. Blurting responses, poor social timing when talking to others, tendency to share inappropriate, intimate details, interrupting others, mood swings, increased desire for approval, poor decision-making, irritability and a quick temper, inability to deal with stress, extreme impatience, taking risks in activities, little or no regard for personal safety or the safety of others. Tim Lott sat down very hard. Later, after visiting the ADHD Foundation in Liverpool and taking their test and finding that all sorts of well-known people had the condition, Justin Timberlake, Paris Hilton, Rory Bremner, Jim Carrey, he was informed that he had it too. In my imagination, I pictured him trying to make light of it, but in the end, the prospect of no respite seemed like a life sentence, at least for Mrs. Lott and her shopping list. The couple agreed to a divorce. Tim moved out. There would be no more family life to write about. I did exactly what Tim Lott had done. I found the Foundation's website. I looked at the list of symptoms. I began to get a very bad feeling about this. There was an online questionnaire, 50 questions along the lines of, do you find that when you ask for directions you can't remember what they were? And do you forget people's names, even members of your own family? Yes, it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Am I really the sort of man who can't remember my own children's names? Well, yes, I do keep calling Hugo Theo and Lottie Meg. Meg is the dog. Hold on a minute. It said ADHD was hereditary. Oh yes, very hereditary. Guess what is the world capital of ADHD? A country where the incidence is completely off the scale, to such an extent that it is accepted as part of the national character. Australia. Now, where did we send all the naughty people? Come to that, if it's hereditary, look at my father, who had 10 pairs of glasses so he could always find one, who once rang my mother from a station platform demanding, "Why am I at Effingham Junction?" He had got on the wrong train, but he kept insisting it was his usual platform. What about his father, who went to Royal Ascot because of the social cachet, despite the fact that he hated crowds? Eventually he panicked and started hitting out with his stick. The stewards had to retain him. I did the quiz and scored somewhere around 85%. Father would have managed 100%. I took the Guardian page and went into the kitchen, something that, in the ordinary course of the day, I would think twice about. If Tamsin was in there, she might walk out or ask, "Are you going to be long?" I wondered if Tim Lott felt the same trepidation. When you think about it, this was a ridiculous way to live. But it had crept up on us gradually. One thing we did know was that our relationship was in trouble. Now we knew why. I told Tamsin about the questionnaire. "What are you going to do about it?" she asked. Well, there were drugs, but I didn't want to take drugs. I'd once taken a homeopathic remedy that was supposed to help with memory, and found myself consumed with the most violent urges. I remember it even now as one of the most terrifying episodes I've ever experienced. Certainly, it put me off psychotic remedies for life. Meanwhile, I supposed that the first thing to do was to get the ADHD confirmed. I made an appointment with the doctor. The doctor asked, "So you want a label, is that it?" She said she would refer me to a psychiatrist. It would take 3 months for an appointment. 3 months? What did the symptoms say? Extreme impatience? I phoned the ADHD Foundation and asked if I could come and take their test that very week. That woman I spoke to knew all about Tim Lott. I had the impression I was not the first of his readers to call. Also, she was conditioned to understand the urgency. Within 5 minutes, I had an appointment for the following week. It would have to do. The office was near Lime Street Station, on a corner in one of those enormous old buildings that make Liverpool seem such an important city. As I made my way up to the foundation's floor, I felt that everyone was nodding to themselves, knowing where I was going. It was like asking the way to the sexually transmitted diseases clinic. A blonde woman in her 40s explained the test, but of course I wasn't listening. Or at least I was, but I didn't take in anything she said. It doesn't matter. I can tell you what happened, because it happened to me, and I remember what happens to me. Other people, not so much. As it says on the ADHD website, the traits of talking over people in conversation, inattentiveness, and being easily bored can be draining on relationships. A person with ADHD can come across as insensitive, irresponsible, or uncaring. The blonde woman took me into a tiny room. A really tiny room. There was just enough space for a pale grey desk with a computer screen, a chair, and, on the wall behind the chair, looking down on the scene, a camera. Although you didn't notice the camera when you walked in. I sat at the desk. I had to put a device on my head. It reminded me of those concave mirrors doctors used to wear in 1930s cartoons. This was so that my head movements could be tracked by a monitor on top of the computer screen. These movements were supposed to be minimal. I was supposed to be concentrating on the screen. My task was to wait for little dots to appear. When they did, I was to click the mouse. That was all. Sounds simple, doesn't it? And it was only for 20 minutes. Already I had a sense of foreboding. I remembered the time I visited a hearing clinic. Tamsin had complained that I never listened, and I had said I hadn't heard her, so she insisted I was going deaf. I ended up at the clinic. They put me in a soundproof cubicle with a pair of headphones and a button. Then they played sounds of varying frequencies through the headphones. When I heard them, I was supposed to press the button. I managed this for a couple of minutes. Then I got bored and fell asleep. When I didn't press the button, the technician thought I was deaf, which meant I had the choice of being classified as deaf or difficult. I chose difficult. I was used to that. I tried very hard with the foundation's dots, but it wasn't long before my feet started fidgeting. I moved them, but that didn't seem any better, so I moved them again, from in front of the chair to underneath it, to behind it, out to the sides, a little stamp with one, and then the other. The dots kept coming, and I kept on clicking the mouse, but I couldn't get comfortable on the chair. I shifted one way and then the other, all the time still moving my feet around. Pretty soon I was squirming about the chair like a guilty suspect in a Columbo movie, all of which was recorded by the camera on the wall. I don't know what the device on the top of the screen made of my head movements. Meanwhile, the dots kept coming. Surely the 20 minutes must be up by now. By the time they let me out, I had given up all pretense of clicking the dots. I couldn't sit still. I was looking all around the room. I knew this feeling. I knew it exactly. It was called fidgeting. I knew I shouldn't be doing this. I should be concentrating. But I couldn't help it. I started wondering when I had felt like this before. It was as if a door had opened, giving a glimpse into a long-forgotten room, and then closed just as soon as I recognized it. The blonde woman came back. I felt there was a knowing look about her. She took me to another room where I sat and waited on my own. This was almost as sparsely furnished as the first. Just another pale grey desk, a desk chair, one of those office cabinets with a box of tissues on it, two small chairs with wooden arms facing each other across a coffee table. The blonde woman came back and took the other chair. She carried a sheaf of papers. She said, "I have the results of your test." There are two other things I remember her saying. The tests indicate that you probably do suffer from AADD and that you are in the 1% of the most severe cases. However, a clinical diagnosis would require a psychiatrist. Then she looked at me and added, "Yes, often it is an emotional moment. Rory Bremner was the same." She handed me the tissues. I took a handful and began to mop at the tears which had started streaming down my face. I do remember that I couldn't speak. The blonde woman sat and watched me weep, her face crumpled with concern. And also, I remember something else in her face. I suppose it was pity. I hated to see that. But it's a bit of a shock at the age of 68, for the first time, to find that finally your whole life makes sense. That was Faster, Louder, Riskier, Sexier. A Wonderful Life with ADHD. If you would like to know what happens next, we will be returning to it in 9 weeks' time. Alternatively, the book is available on Amazon in Kindle, paperback, and Audible editions. Until next week, goodbye.